Come on in, welcome to my home. Today we are turning the sourdough starter into bread. In fact, I don't even know if this is going to work. You'll get to find this out live with me. Well, maybe not live, but you know what I mean. You get to find this out with me. My hopes are not that high right now, because I just took a peek at it, and yeah, it's not that high. And if it fails, we'll try it again next week, because we will have figured out some of the problems, because I figured out some of the problems this week, but a little later. Let me go back to explain. Okay, so we did the whole sourdough starter. That was easy, I guess. Yes, it was easy. But then it became an issue where how much water do you add? How much sourdough starter do you add? How much flour do you add? Because I did lots of research, and it goes everywhere. Some people are saying it's 1 part water, 1 part starter, 1 part flour. Other people are saying it's 1 part water, 1 part flour, or 1 part water, 1 part starter, and 2 parts flour. I don't know. So what I ended up doing was I stuck with the 1 part water, 1 part starter, 1 part flour. However, what I also found out was that this gave me, it didn't double in size, which I think is sort of bad. It did have the bubbles, all of that stuff, and I did keep it going. But the other part about this is the recipe that I had called for 2 1/3 cups of starter, and I will link the recipe down below that I used. And guess what? What you're making does not make that. No, in fact, you are supposed to get like a 1/2 cup of starter, and then you might get 1/2 cup of leftover starter to use. So that means you're going to have to store up your starter to make a bread. And I'm like, well, okay. So then, luckily, I caught on to that very early, so I began to store up my starter and feed my starter and make sure that that was all going well. But yeah, we'll have to see. And like I said, my bread is in the oven, and there are a few special pieces of equipment to get my bread this far. One of the big things that I did, which I know some of you are probably having a cow about, I put the sourdough bread into the bread maker. I know I shouldn't have, because we've talked about metal and how sourdough can react to metal. However, the bread maker is supposed to be able to handle sourdough. We'll see. We'll see what happens. But let's go and we'll take you through the steps that it got me to the point where I put it into the oven. Let's let voiceover me do that. Now, a lot of this is rinse and repeat. Feeding your sourdough is quite easy, and I did use the 1/2 cup, 1/2 cup, 1/2 cup. So my first ratio was 1-1-1. 1 part flour, 1 part water, and 1 part starter. This seemed to do okay, and it seemed to do a really nice job. The one thing that I had wished that I knew, like I said in the first video, is to have 2 containers, so that way you can put your starter into a container. And the other thing that I'd wish that I'd done is I wish that I had kept the starter that I discarded from actually putting in the starter, so that it can go and grow, because I needed 2 1/3 cups of starter for the recipe that I used, which will be linked down below in the description. And I had to quickly figure out, oh, hey, I'm going to need that discarded starter for the rest of this. So I did keep it. I didn't discard it. I just made sure to put it into another vessel, just like this canning jar that I'm putting it in right there and then. And so on this last day when I was doing that, I realized that not only do I have the starter, but I also need to feed the starter for this last day. So that's what I did. I fed the starter to make sure that it would be all ready for when it was time to be turned into actual sourdough bread. And so this is just that process of doing the final feeding with the remaining leftover starter. And then we're ready to go. And I like being able to do that, because it just makes everything so much easier. It makes things so much nicer. And putting it into just a jar, I still have the problems with those little cloth caps that go over there. But yeah, I got it on there. Everything was ready to go. And so then we can get ready to make our dough in our bread maker, but that's on to another step. So let's get on to step making dough, okay? So this is the easy part. This is you're making your dough. I'm measuring out everything to make sure that I have enough starter, to make sure I have the equal amount, the right amounts of flour and water, because it doesn't take too much. I should have used a bigger scraper because, yeah, the tiny one was just a bit absurd. But hey, it worked. So I need to get all of my starter into my measuring cup to make sure I have 2 3/4 of a cup. And I do, which was a good thing. So then we pour that from that measuring cup into my bread maker. And I know some of you are like cringing at the thought of doing this in a bread maker, but that's the hopper for my bread maker. I didn't have the time to knead and everything that I wanted to have, so I knew that the bread maker could do it, and it did. It did it pretty well. But the one thing you want to remember is if you have one of those tiny spatulas, get a full-size spatula. Then we add our flour. Now I do a thing where I do this with everything. I will tap it 3 or 4 times, then dump the flour into the container. So I'll do it again, where I get enough flour, tap, 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 scrape off the top, dump it in. And then one more time, which, yes, I could have taken out the other scoop, but I didn't. Okay, so, yeah. So then I will go in there, and I've got to get my 1/3 of a cup scoop, which I've, of course, left behind me. And so I go, I get that, bring it in there, do the same thing, and that will be all of our flour into the bread maker, or the bread maker hopper. Then the next thing that you do is you add your water, and then you add the salt. And for whatever reason, I did not have my salt right there with me, but I did use sea salt to do this. So I used just a scant tablespoon of sea salt. Goes sprinkles on the top. Now we're ready to get it into the bread maker. And that's where things get really nice and interesting and fairly easy. So once we're in the bread maker, I put the hopper into the bread maker. It fits in really nicely. Close the lid. Then it's time to put it on the dough setting. Then you select the menu button until you get to your dough setting, and then you'll hit start. It really is that easy. So now we are into just getting the dough into our bowl to have it raised. These bowls I do are special bowls which are for sourdough. They're really easy to work with. It has a muslin lining. They've all been cleaned and everything. So I take the dough, scrape it out of my hopper, and then I will place it into our muslin lined bowl. And it does need to have some grease on top of it so that way it hopefully will not stick to anything. This I thought was a pretty sticky dough even for sourdough, so I would have liked it to be a little bit less sticky, but hey, we'll work with it. I did knead it some because of how sticky it was. And if your dough is sticky, you can knead it some so that you can get some of the flour in there. And it's not too hard to knead it to get the extra flour so it doesn't completely stick to everything. Because not everything that you have is going to be non-stick. Then you can try doing the window pane test, which you should be able to stretch your dough so the light comes through it before it tears. It did do that semi-successfully, but not 100% successfully. I just kept working the dough and working the dough until I had the consistency that I liked. I liked the texture of it, and then I also liked the way that it worked, the way that it felt, the way that it moved, and it was really nice to be able to do that. So then once you have that all done, and you can see it's still sort of sticky, but not horribly sticky, then it is very easy to then take your dough and place it into your raising container. Now, I did let mine raise for approximately 24 hours. You can do as little as 4 hours, you can do 24 hours. I just had the extra time and the place to put it, so then I could then put it into my wonderful little container to let it raise. Obviously, I felt that it was still sort of sticky, and that's something that you have to think about. Is your bread too sticky to actually easily work with? It shouldn't stick to your hands. It should just be able to like pull off like a nice dough would do. It shouldn't stick to the counter, which is why I was making sure that there was extra flour underneath it and everything. You want to have some gluten develop so that way it will be able to hold its shape just a bit. And that's where we are. We're getting that gluten all nice and tight. And so that way I can then form it into a ball, and then I put it into the container. Now, the one thing I am going to do is I'm going to spritz it with oil, and the spritzer at first was not spritzing really great. But I sprayed it with oil, liked that, and then I realized, oh hey, the underside is not sprayed with oil. So I thought I should probably spray the underside with oil. So I just picked it up, flipped it over, then we'll spray the top, which is now the top. We'll spray that with oil. And then the easy part comes with the weighting, because once you have the oil on it, all you need to do is put a cloth over it and then just have it sit and wait in a nice room temperature area so that way it can do its rise. And you do want to have it ready to rise and bake. Okay, so this is the easy part, because I have the tools to do this. That's a silicone mat, which can go into my pot that I'm cooking it in. My dough has risen some, not a lot. I did have to adjust it as I put it in there, but I was worried. I was very worried. Then, of course, you're supposed to cut a slit in the top so that steam could escape, but I was super, super worried. I knew that I could cover this over, and then you were supposed to bake it according to the recipe for 20 minutes on 400 degrees. But of course, it had to be preheated to 450 degrees, then turned down once you start baking it. Once it's in there, and it's really easy to do. After our 20 minutes are over, then it is time to take the lid off. Now, to do this, you do have to pull it out far enough to get the lid off safely, which I did not do at first, but I did. I got the lid off, and so now you want to cook your bread until it is nice and crusty. The internal temperature needs to be about 205, 210, and I did that. So then I went and I checked on the bread to see how it was doing. It did not look dark enough. Like, it still looked really, really pale, and I had no idea why. I tested it, heard to see if it had the right sound. It seemed to have the right sound, but I put it back in and let it cook. Then once again, I checked it, and this time I decided, well, okay, I think it's probably about time for it to come out. So then I took it out, and the one thing you have to remember is when you take it out, let it cool. Let it cool for an hour before you even slice into it. Slicing into it was fairly simple, and I'll explain more of this as we get back to me talking about it. But yeah, that's how easy it was to do. Pretty simple. Alright, so you saw me just cut the bread. I think it's kind of dense. We'll see how it tastes now. Oddly enough, that's actually good. It is undercooked a bit. It has a really, crunchy texture. The inside, I don't know if you can see that, is, like I said, it's a little bit undercooked, but I'm going to call this a success because it really is good. It is not sweet. It is a sourdough bread, but it isn't one of those that punches you in the face with the whole, it's sour, this is sourdough. No, this is actually really good. Make good sourdough buns. And then to put this on, dipping in some oil, That'd be really good. This is really good. I'm taking this as a success, even though I made a few mistakes. One, did not cook long enough. And yeah, I'm sure the cast iron or the different pot would be better. So no, I need to cook it for a little bit longer. But overall, the texture isn't bad and I like the taste. I really, really, really like the taste. The taste has just this hint of tang to it. So yeah, I don't think all I would do is just cook it longer. I was expecting to actually fail. And I totally was 100% thinking that this was going to be a fail, and instead this turned out pretty good. I'm happy. You will see the sourdough appear again, but not next week because I want to build it up and test it out a little bit more. But yeah, so that's you've seen me do it live. Live, I should say. It was really fun. It's really pretty easy to do. I just now have to figure out what's up with my oven and those sort of things. So we will come back to the sourdough with the complete thing. But yeah, I think it was absolutely worth it. I think this was fun. And it's just so good. I can only wait to eat this on. I'm going to have a sandwich with it tonight. So yeah. I hope you enjoyed this. At this time, I'd like to take this time to thank these wonderful people who let me go on these tangents where I make these things. If you want to become part of the Patreon family or part of the channel members, go ahead and subscribe, and that way we can do bigger and better things, because I'd love to do all sorts of different kinds of sourdoughs and that sort of thing. I do have some desserts coming up, but that will be later on. And don't forget, Halloween and Christmas will also be coming up soon. So those will be fun things to get ready for. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope I get to see you again the next time you stop by.